Hi, I'm Bowen, and welcome to the Seventh Circle of Hell. Today we're going to be talking about the history of the IRA because the new IRA has made some very interesting threats lately. Threats that I'm going to cover in probably my next video. If you enjoy today's content, please like, and if you want to see more like this, please subscribe. And throughout the video, please put your thoughts in the comments. The only thing I ask is that you keep it respectful. The IRA, which stands for Irish Republican Army, is a group of paramilitary organizations with the first being founded in 1919. They've had a goal, essentially, for their entire existence of removing Britain from Ireland and creating a unified Irish Ireland. IRA was the successor to the Irish Volunteers and the Irish Citizens Army, following the 1916 Easter Rising and the 1918 election of Sinn Féin, leading to the creation of the Dáil Éireann, Ireland's revolutionary parliament. One of the IRA's most influential figures was Michael Collins. He employed guerrilla tactics, including ambush, raids, and sabotage during the Irish War of Independence from 1919 to 1921, which ultimately forced the British to negotiate the Anglo-Irish Treaty, which created the Irish Free States made up of 26 counties. The 1921 treaty caused a major split within the IRA because Northern Ireland still remained underneath British control. There were two sides. The Free State Army, also called the National Army, which was the pro-treaty faction, and the Irregulars, which was the anti-treaty faction. The Irregulars continued armed resistance against the British, which eventually led to the Irish Civil War of 1922 to 1923. The Irregulars took up arms not just against the British, though, but also the Free State Army. The National Army, or Free State Army, became the official army for the Free State of Ireland under the Anglo-Irish Treaty in 1922. The Free State Army would remain the army for the Republic of Ireland in 1937 as well. The IRA, through Chief of Staff Tommy Barry, began working with Nazi Germany when Barry went with a Nazi spy to Germany in 1937. Then, under the leadership of Sean Russell, who began leading the IRA in 1938, they began to attack Britain with directions from the Nazis. This came after rejecting the Barry Plan, which came before the S Plan, made by Sean Russell and James O'Donovan. The S Plan was the system used by the IRA to attack Britain with Nazi backing. In 1940, Sean Russell traveled to Germany, where he helped discuss what was going to be the IRA's part in Operation Sea Lion, the Nazi plan to take over Britain. Russell, however, died due to illness on his way back from Germany, and the IRA's operations largely failed, including the Nazi ones. People will argue that only the leadership of the IRA can be held accountable for collaborating with the Nazis, and that most of the IRA was unaware of what was happening, and you can't apply that to them at all, or the organization at large. However, I find this idea, particularly for the IRA at that specific time, very contestable for multiple reasons. Firstly, they were allegedly using German weapons such as ammunition and explosives. During World War II, who else would they have been receiving those things from? They also received money from Nazi Germany, as well as had direct contact with spies, Nazi spies and operatives, in Ireland. Again, who else would you have been working with if you're getting Nazi money and meeting Nazi spies other than the Nazis? This was not something that the people and members of the IRA were unaware of. Secondly, if we were to apply identical logic, there are many sorts of supporters of both Stalin and Hitler that would never be held accountable for what they did. Same goes for Mussolini and Lenin. So no, you cannot just say and throw all of this aside with some, oh, well, only leadership knew. That kind of falls flat because there's evidence that no, not only leadership knew, and further, that's not how we apply it to any other people from this era. Why are we suddenly applying it to them that way? There is, of course, a third reason I will give as well. Their goals were aligned enough to allow collaborative relationships between Nazi Germany and the IRA. sentiments were secure enough that Sean felt that the IRA members would be willing to aid in Operation Sea Lion. They would have known and seen visible Nazi soldiers at that point and known who they were working for, even if we pretended that the ammunition, the guns, the money, the explosives, and the agents weren't already in Ireland with the IRA at the time. And you may be thinking that the IRA is not particularly anti-Semitic, so what does this have to do with the Nazi Germany's Holocaustic endeavors? Well, by 1940, some IRA publications and members had actually adopted anti-Semitic rhetoric, claiming that the Irish government was influenced by the Jews and the Freemasons. Although I will say they were still mainly focused on anti-British efforts in collaboration with the Nazis, not particularly anti-Jew ones. Oh, yeah, and then there was also the arrests of pro-Nazi IRA agents, not leadership, agents. By 1940, G2 had interned over 1,000 suspected IRA members along with Albert liaisons. For those who don't know, ABWER is a Nazi secret intelligence operations group. One case really stood out when I was looking into this as clear evidence that IRA members knew that their leadership was working with the Nazis and likely supported the Nazi cause. Hermann Gurtz was an Albert agent who parachuted into Ireland in May of 1940. He successfully established contact with the IRA and other IRA members, not just leadership, and operated clandestinely for approximately 18 months until he was arrested. During his 18 months operation, again, he didn't just work with leadership, he worked with other IRA operatives. The 1950s were an era of reconstruction for the IRA, recovering from their earlier collaborations. But by 1956, they'd launched Operation Harvest, a border campaign against Britain. The campaign was another guerrilla warfare effort by the IRA aimed at removing Britain from Northern Ireland. This was largely not successful and generally is considered a failure. In 1969, the IRA split again into the official IRA, which favored political methods to achieving IRA goals, and the provisional IRA, which did not favor political methods into achieving the IRA's goals. Like I said, the official IRA focused more on political measures of achieving the goals of the IRA itself, moving from violent behavior to more Marxist political strategies. The Provisional IRA didn't like that. They wanted to continue using violent methods to get Britain out of Ireland. And so the Provisional IRA becomes the dominant force, the dominant faction of the IRA itself, while the official IRA slowly merges into the parliamentary government. The Provisional IRA were a key part of the Troubles, which lasted for around 30 years and resulted in about 1,800 deaths, which included over 600 civilians being killed. This include assassinations, bombings, and general guerrilla operations by the IRA. Some infamous events from this time period include Bloody Sunday in 1972, the Bobby Sands hunger strike in 81, and the Omaha bombings of 98. Omaha bombing of 98. There was not more than one. Bloody Sunday itself happened on January 30th, 1972 in Derry, Northern Ireland. British Army soldiers of the 1st Battalion Parachute Regiment opened fire on a protest in Northern Ireland organized by the Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association, who was protesting the internment of certain individuals without trial, like protesting lack of being given due process here in the US, essentially. 14 civilians died during this protest after the battalion opened fire. The battalion opened fire because members of the protest, who are believed to have been IRA or associated with the IRA, or just IRA sympathizers at the very least, began throwing stones at the army barriers. After the shooting, two major inquiries followed. The Whitgiry Tribunal of 1972, which largely accepted British Army accounts and were criticized as they were whitewashed, and then the Seville inquiry from 1998 into 2010, which concluded the shootings were ultimately unjustified and that the deceased did not pose a viable threat to the battalion. So they weren't saying that there was zero threat, but just that the people killed were not the threat. At the 1986 Sinn Féin Ard Fios, apologies, trying my best, delegates voted to end the refusal to participate in the parliament, shifting away from their pro-violent strategies into a more government-focused strategy. But why did the IRA care what Sinn Féin had to say? Well, in 1916, Sinn Féin, the Irish Volunteers, and the Irish Citizens' Army were all aligned in the Rising. Sinn Féin itself was founded in 1905 by Arthur Griffith with a similar goal of the IRA. Irish independence from Britain. During the Troubles, the Provisional Sinn Féin emerged along with the Provisional IRA. This gave the Provisional IRA a certain degree of legitimacy. The ballot and armorlight strategy of the 1980s blended political participation with existing arm campaigns, linking Sinn Féin closer to the IRA's efforts. And in 1994, after the 1986 Ard Fios, a key point in the peace process, the IRA ceasefire was accompanied by more efforts from Sinn Féin to engage in political action over encouraging or supporting violent action. I'm going to butcher this name and I apologize in advance. Raruri O'Bradigan and Dalithi O'Connell, along with others, disagreed with the vote, and in response to that, they led another split of the IRA, which would result in the continuing IRA's creation in 1986. The IRA physically cannot stay as one organization, and after this point, it never is one organization again. The continuing IRA are still operating today. And ultimately, these disagreements culminated in the 1998 Good Friday Agreement. A year prior to that, in 1997, the real IRA emerged, another splinter group off of the provisional IRA, disagreeing over the Good Friday Agreement. It's always an agreement. These people, I don't want to say these people, but these groups, these fringe groups that fracture off from the existing IRA group, are always in defiance of whatever new peace process is being attempted, favoring violent practices. It is a very socialist, leftist behavior. If you read any of Lenin's works, he does this all the time, encouraging this kind of behavior over and over and over again. It's very leftist. I do find it quite interesting. The real IRA was founded by Michael McKevitt with association from figures such as Bernadette Sands McKevitz. The real IRA sometimes collaborated with the continuing IRA, but both believed themselves to be the legitimate heirs to the original IRA, thus leading to strife between the two factions and a lack of, cohesion in joining up. In 2012, the real IRA merged with other fringe IRA factions, except for the continuing IRA. They did not merge with the real IRA because, that would delegitimize their claim to being the true heirs to the original IRA. Anyways, in 2012, the real IRA joins up with a bunch of other ex-IRA, or I guess splinter IRA factions to create the new IRA. There have been a lot of labels applied to the IRA: socialist, capitalist, nationalist, Marxist, terrorist. And I do think it's interesting because they are very much so a paramilitary organization with a clear goal of Irish liberation from Britain first. That is undeniable. However, we can look at some of the things that they have done, said, and policies or figures that they've supported to kind of see which of these claims are necessarily legitimate. Firstly, though, I do want to discuss the original organizations that came before the original IRA: the Nationalist Irish Volunteers and the Socialist Irish Citizens' Army. Do with this information what you will. The Irish Volunteers' stances were focused on Irish nationalism, self-reliance, and protecting Irish interests, and opposing British domination. This was the basis of their stance, and this influenced whatever economic stances they would have. So the Irish Volunteers didn't really have economic motivations. They were very much so a nationalist group. The Irish Citizens Army, however, was founded on a socialist workers' rights platform, rejecting British imperialism and capitalist exploitation, while advocating for an Irish socialist republic. So, unlike the other organization, this is a clear economic policy which is clearly socialist. So you get the IRA being created from this nationalist organization and this socialist organization. Here's the reality about the IRA itself. They are so fractured that you cannot just apply a label to the entirety of the IRA. While some labels might do an all right job acting as a blanket for the majority, there is always going to be outlier groups because they are so fractured and because some of these factions are just so militaristic that certain aspects of these labels cannot physically apply to them. So, while left-wing terms of socialist and Marxist apply to the ICA, the OIRA, the NIRA, and the irregulars, some groups stand out strongly as others being terrorist groups, such as the CIRA, and the irregulars again, the OIRA, the PIRA, the RIRA, and the NIRA. All branches of the IRA can be considered to be nationalist. I will say that is probably the one label that you can blanketly apply to the entirety of the IRA. They are all nationalist groups because they believe in a Irish nation of Irish individuals. They are very much so nationalistic. And I also would say it's fairly accurate to say that none of the IRA factions are capitalist. The majority are actually anti-imperialist and pro-socialist, or at the very least, anti-capitalist. Ultimately, I would say that the IRA as a whole can be described as similar to their World War II counterparts, but for Ireland, not Germany, and minus the genocide. Thank you for watching today's video. Again, if you liked it, please smash that like button, and if you want to see more like this, subscribe. And as always, if you've had any thoughts, please put them in the comments. Just keep it respectful. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and God bless.